Richard, back with my esteemed panel talking about Harry Reid's committee hearing today regarding the FLDS and the debacle in El Dorado, Texas. And I want to first go back to Deputy Headmistress because she did a great job chronicling the allegations made by CPS that got everybody stirred up against the FLDS when they snatched those children away, and how slowly but surely those allegations started falling apart. And Headmistress, do you want to discuss what you saw with regard to that? Because you did a great job of parsing the statements and the evidence.
I will give it my best shot. I do write much better than I talk. First of all, I should say, I did not come into it initially thinking that this was all that CPS was doing everything wrong. When I first heard about it, I believed there was a Sarah, and I was concerned that perhaps, I believed all the most gory stories, that perhaps they'd killed her and buried the body or something. And the more I read, the more concerned I was that I had been listening to rumors for years and not even realizing it. They just sort of seep into your consciousness. I noticed, first of all, that what different CPS workers said contradicted each other. One would say they had over 36 pregnant girls, and another would say, well, we have 20-something, and that's not to say that all of them are currently underage. They have been underage mothers at some point. And another one would say, we got these, we know these women are children because we eyeballed them, we looked at them. And another one would say, no, they've told us that they are minor children. And just the contradictory stories back and forth didn't add up. Their numbers didn't add up. Angie Voss, the CPS, I believe she was the supervisor, said that she saw pregnant minors when she went in. Apparently there are only 2 pregnant women, and they were both adults. They had their babies. And immediately...
And one of them 37 years old?
Yes. Sarah Draper Barlow, or Barlow Draper, I believe, was a 37-year-old mother of a teenage daughter and some younger children. She's a nurse. And, and I looked at her picture. The FLDS women are lovely women, and she is a beautiful woman, but she does not look like a 16-year-old. We would have guessed in our 20s. I have several daughters, and my daughters also look much younger than they are, so that was another issue that concerned me when CPS, I think it was Daryl Azar, said, I've looked at them, and none of them are over 18. You can tell. Well, you can't tell by looking. They don't wear makeup, neither do my daughters, and it does make a difference for some people's skin. So it's just silly little things that were not adding up.
Well, one thing you have to question is whether they were doing this in good faith in the case of the one so-called underage mother who actually delivered her baby in Austin, Texas, and then immediately after the birth they decided she was an adult and tried to take the baby.
Absolutely.
Did take the baby.
They took custody of the baby. They allowed her to keep him with her, but they retained custody. And I watched... basically, CPS shot itself in the foot. I had participated in several online discussion groups, and I watched several people who had formerly been arguing with me that this needed to be done because the FLDS were, bad guys. When that happened, they began saying, I don't think CPS is really above board in all of this. Another issue is, if they're so confused about age, why is it they didn't have a single case of a male that they said was a child when he was actually an adult? They only did this with the women.
Yeah, and another thing that's amazing that people need to remember is these women who were adults actually had official documentation establishing that, which CPS willfully ignored.
Yes, a couple of attorneys I read, complained at the time when their clients were officially declared to be adults. They said, you've got no new documentation. This is what you've been seeing from the beginning, and what you said you didn't, you didn't have to rely on. In the very first hearing, the 14-day hearing, the judge ruled that Angie Voss didn't have to accept documentation because who knew whether or not it was forged.
Yeah, that's just absurd. Well, I want to go to Kurt now. Kurt, you're the attorney on the panel, and as everybody probably knows out there, some indictments came down in El Dorado. I'd like you to discuss that and what your thoughts are about that, and whether or not it's true that prosecutors can really indict a ham sandwich.
Well, I think the first thing to keep in mind, Jerri, about indictments is that they are notoriously inaccurate in predicting eventual guilt. If you want to get a feel for how inaccurate they can be, just think back to the Mike Nifong incident in North Carolina and the Duke lacrosse team, where a whole community was convinced, from the community leaders to the university leaders to everybody but the parents of the players, that these boys had raped and abused these black girls. And it was all untrue. It was viciously untrue. So I think that's the first thing to just keep in mind, is that indictments are used routinely by prosecutors. Prosecutors, if they want to, can either indict or they can effect an arrest on what's called an information. An information is just a relatively private procedure where the police make the accusation privately, and then you go pick up the suspect and take him to the station. An indictment is a nice way to thoroughly publicize the issue. And prosecutors like to do this partly to make an example of defendants, because they think that helps discourage other people from committing crimes. But they also do it, some of them will do it deliberately to poison the jury pool. So indictments are not accurate predictors of guilt. Under our system of government, we insist that we all treat each other as innocent until we are proven guilty in a court of law. And so we all have an obligation in our constitutional society here to give that courtesy to these people who have been indicted in the FLDS community, and assume for now that the prosecution is wrong, that these people are innocent until they're proven guilty. Now, this particular case is littered with all kinds of landmines for the prosecution, starting with what they would like to call details, like the legitimacy of the original search warrant itself. Can the evidence that was collected on the basis of this faulty warrant, can it be presented in a court of law? And there's some exclusionary rules that may come in that would eliminate some of what even CPS and the Texas Rangers are calling evidence. There are also some questions about the constitutionality of the Texas laws on bigamy and the age of consent. These laws, as somebody else mentioned earlier, were deliberately changed by the Texas legislature to drive out of Texas a single religious minority.
Yeah, I think the age of marriage was changed and the bigamy law was changed. I think the age of consent has always been 17, as long as I can remember. But I mean, changing. Well,
marriage was legal at age 14 in Texas until 2005. And now, I mean, effective in 2005, the legislature changed that law as a mechanism for driving out the FLDS.
Is it possible that is what's called a bill of attainder?
It's very, very possible, yes.
Well, go ahead. Why don't you explain to the folks what that is?
Well, in essence, a legislature cannot draft a law that is specifically targeted at a particular individual, and especially cannot draft a law. Well, it's a different issue. But you can't draft a law that is designed just to attack a particular individual or group, and so that's another possible challenge. But the other thing to keep in mind is that even if some of these people have been indicted, even if they are convicted at trial, there is still a lengthy appeals process. And we've already seen one instance in which the 51st District Court there in Texas with Judge Walter was overturned unanimously by the Court of Appeals on her decision to allow CPS to keep these children. And then the Supreme Court of Texas, of course, also ratified the appeals court and told Judge Walter that she just didn't know what she was doing. And so it's possible that you could go through the whole trial process, have guilty verdicts at the trial stage, and yet still have these people eventually exonerated, down the road 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, so everyone out there who's hot to prosecute them needs to hold back their fire.
And watch out for the perp walks. You're going to see almost certainly, as soon as they find these people that have been indicted, I would fully expect the Texas prosecutors to deliberately arrange stage this thing so that the press are there with cameras rolling when they put the cuffs on and push their heads into the police car and so forth. And that will all be just a big PR stunt to try to poison the jury pool.
Well, especially in light of the fact that the elders of the church are saying, we will bring them into you.
Yes.
So that would just be absurd and
totally unnecessary.
Yeah, totally unnecessary, just aggrandizement of government power, celebration of government power. And I want to talk about the nature of the kind of evidence that they probably presented at the grand jury, which is probably some of the same evidence that we've seen talked about in the press. And Bill or Mary, Bill, you've written about that. Do either you or Mary want to talk about what kind of evidence we're talking about here?
Well, from the beginning, they were talking about the pregnant girls that eventually magically disappeared. They were not girls. The oldest one, as you said, was 37. Both of the pregnant mothers were adults in their 20s. They weren't even close to being minors. As far as the other evidence, you had the broken bones that was so highly touted in the camera and in the legislature that it showed a pattern of abuse against these children. They had 41 children that they found to have broken bones, but no x-rays were taken. Now, I don't know anybody out there, but they seem to be able to see a broken bone without an x-ray machine. At any rate, 41 broken bones out of 465 is less than the average out there. Not only that, but most people do not know, while one of those children were in CPS's custody, they had a broken bone on them. She broke her arm, a 2-year-old. Does this mean that CPS abused that child? Well, by their standards, yes, it does. There are also 500 DNA tests taken, and if you'll notice during the indictments, not one of those DNA tests proved that there was an underage girl that gave birth to a baby. Not one. All the indictments were based upon private children's diaries and letters that were illegally obtained, in my view, during the fishing expedition that they started based upon a hoax that they knew about. So, I mean, everything that they tried to put forth has been proven wrong. So now they've arrested 5 men based upon church records that they couldn't have grabbed if they had walked into a Baptist church or a Catholic church. Why is it legal for them to have the FLDS's church records?
Well, that's a really good
mind-boggling.
Well, that's a really good question. And one thing we have to wonder with those so-called underage marriage that apparently the indictments were gathered on is whether they were in fact marriages or betrothals, because this is a very old-fashioned sect that has 19th century traditions. Is that possible, Bill?
They were betrothals because they didn't even live together in the same house. The records that the police have, that the troopers and the rangers have, shows they did not cohabitate.
Okay, well, we got a hard break, but we'll finish this when we come back after the break.
Thank you.